different careers. I mean, it's been really illuminating in that regard. I also want to thank all of you who have, again, who have participated in the conference, staying the course, asking questions, and remaining open to all of the possibilities a PhD in history that you might eventually pursue. And I also want to thank Virginia Sharp, Jen McPherson, Eric Pacer, and the UNM Mellon Group for being the brain trust behind this conference and this project. So there have been a lot of hours. Finally, I want to thank Jim Grossman for asking our faculty, students, department, and the university to be part of this project. It has been wonderful thus far, and he put a lot of trust in our department and the people in it to do a great job, and I think we have already, exceeded every expectation, perhaps even our own. So, again, thank you, Jim. Well, over the course of the day, we have heard about career paths leading to public history, administrative work in NGOs, social justice movements, government work, historical research, and about publishing and writing history. This evening, we will be hearing about a career path that took one of our very own into the world of financial services. All right, so a really different trajectory. Well, when you look at Dr. Robert Donia's scholarly CV versus his professional resume that he'll talk quite a bit about, what strikes you is a steady and prolific publishing record. His first monograph, Islam Under the Double Eagle, The Muslims of Bosnia-Herzegovina, 1878 to 1914, was based on his dissertation and published in 1981. This work, as well as Bosnia-Herzegovina, another book, Bosnia-Herzegovina, A Tradition Betrayed, co-authored with his dissertation advisor, John Fine, are staples of any PhD reading list in the field of East European or Balkan history. Since that first book, Bob has published a scholarly work on Bosnia-Herzegovina each decade since the 1980s. His latest work, published by Cambridge University Press and available to be purchased, is a biography of Radovan Karadzic titled Radovan Karadzic, Architect of the Bosnian Genocide. That particular book is based not only on his considerable field expertise, but also using secret documents and telephone incepts gathered by the prosecutors in The Hague, as well as drawing from his own interchanges with Radovan Karadzic while serving as an expert witness. Okay? Thus, his scholarly record, along with his work as an expert witness for the International Criminal Tribunal of the former Yugoslavia, would make him a candidate for a distinguished professor at any university, including our own. And here's the big however. He pursued and accomplished all of this as he worked his way up through the ranks of Merrill Lynch, eventually becoming a vice president for this global investment and wealth management company. He and his wife, Jan Ritter, who is here, an attorney, brought their professional successes and their intellectual passions together to endow a professorship of human rights at the University of Michigan. A formidable record to be sure, but what it doesn't reveal is Bob's limitless generosity toward those who seek out his expertise in different professional settings, among different peoples, and across many continents. He will be sharing much of this expertise tonight as he explains to us how he cloaked Clio in a business suit, brought history to the world of business, and did not lose his soul. So, thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much for this. And here's some things about myself. Of course,
You didn't think about all that publicly.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me. It's delightful to be with you. This is quite a project, and I've been impressed practically from the minute I got here about the energy and devotion of those of you who've been organizing this thing for a time to making this happen. It's actually a question I've almost been waiting for somebody to ask, is how do you go about expanding the utility of history to other disciplines and professions? And I think it's fantastic that it's happening now, fantastic that it's happening here. I certainly, in just 24 hours, have had an impression of the history department here that it is extraordinarily collegial, very accomplished, and exemplary in its practices of good interpersonal relations. And so congratulate you on that, and also let me tell you how pleased I am that you're a part of this very experimental and interesting forward-looking program brought to you by the AHA and this university. I have to say that I sat through the panels this morning and began to get concerned that I wouldn't have anything left to say by the end of the day. And I certainly developed the impression that there's a good number of people in this room who could give this talk tonight. However, like you, I'm a historian. I'm prepared to talk, and I'm going to give it whether you want to hear it, and regardless of whether it's been said before. But you will hear in some of the things I have to say tonight some echoes of some themes and ideas, and even vocabulary that you heard earlier in the day, which I hope will be only from a different perspective of someone who's gone into the business world. My purpose today is to assess the benefits, risk, and challenges that a historian may face in experiencing a career transition. My perspective is that, well, I'm a historian. I was a historian when I began my career in the 70s. That is still my primary identification as a professional person. And now, you know what happens when you tell someone in business that you're a historian. They say, my brother-in-law Joel is a Civil War buff. So, the term historian, while everyone in this room, I think, has a pretty good understanding of what it is and what we do, is not necessarily shared by people really in any of the other types of organizations or careers that we could be talking about. I'll be speaking from basically two additional perspectives. The first was my own experience over about a 3-year period in making the transition from functioning in academia and having an academic career into business. Looking back on it, I realized that it probably took longer, it was more painful than it needed to be. So I guess I'm kind of thinking that I wish I had then the insights that I do now about it. And that's part of what motivates me to talk about it tonight. Once I got to Merrill Lynch and became a manager of one of the offices, I did a tremendous amount of interviewing. Basically, the function of an office manager at Merrill Lynch is twofold. It's to lead and guide the existing employees in becoming more productive and making sure that everybody is following both the ethical and legal guidelines in terms of behavior. And then it's also to manage the cadre, meaning finding, that is, hiring and recruiting people, and unfortunately sometimes terminating. So I spent a lot of time behind the desk talking to candidates, and I developed a certain sense of what I really wanted to see or hear from candidates who came in the door, and that's part of what I'm talking from today. But my focus is basically on you, the professional historian, and I'm going to assume, just for the sake of argument, that you at least have an inkling of a desire to contemplate a career change. So what I'd like to do for the next 3 hours, no, it'll be, is shift the conference topic just a bit from what uses history to what uses the historian. What use is history is what my father said to me when I began the 5th year of graduate school. What use is the historian is what he said to me when I began the 6th year of graduate school. And I think it's the way I'd like to formulate the question tonight. My basic thesis is that it's the quality of your character, as much as the specific skills that you may have, that will be the key to launching a new career or making a transition to a new career, if you elect to do that. Here's my outline. Talk about the common stereotypes, which are so insidious, really, between business and academia. We'll compare the two a bit, and then talk about, at the heart of what I have to say, the nature of this career transition, assessing, communicating, and integrating into the new organization. And then finally finish up with a few comments about the benefits and hopes of career change. Okay. Stereotypes of business. We live in a world of stereotypes. Every business or profession has stereotypes about it. I think those about business are particularly damning in many respects. You think about the way that business people have been portrayed in Hollywood, and you immediately come to mind. Gordon Gekko comes to mind. The great Gekko call. Greed is good. And then if you are over 85 and remember Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, there's another stereotype there, which is a little bit different. The Gordon Gekko figure is the epitome of excess wealth, power, and glamour, which ends in utter decadence, catastrophe, and exploitation of everyone around him. The Death of the Salesman, on the other hand, the Willie Loman persona, or say Bartleby the Scrivener in Herman Melville's novel of that name. These are dull personalities. They're automatons inhabiting a world of mind-numbing routine, meaningless repetitions. They live a Spartan existence and are obsessed with numbers which are of no consequence. This, and then there are, of course, stereotypes of academics. Now, in this particular one, I think we shot ourselves in the foot. Because nobody who's not been part of this world would come up with a combination like that. This is the way we would like to see ourselves, I think. Engaged, intense, committed, challenging people to think and bringing new information to the table. But if you really look at what the outsiders, many outsiders think of this, it's more like this. This is Hannah history, and this is Harvey history. And Hannah actually is in the 11th year as a graduate student instructor. She lives in a one-bedroom apartment about 5 miles from campus with 8 other people. Commutes by skateboard 1 day a week to teach her class in radical thought in the Americas in the 1980s. And her main objective in life is to live indoors. On the other hand, Harvey is a rather noted individual. He has just finished his well-received work, which was race, gender, ethnicity, identity, nationalism. And a lot of in early 13th century Angkor Wat. which was featured in a 15-second segment on C-SPAN 39. The dissertations that you haven't yet heard of category. Okay, stereotypes abound, and they're all nasty. They're all not very complimentary to anybody, and of course we know that they're all, you really don't know what life is like until you get into one of these careers or organizations and programs. But there are some differences between academia and the business world, and I think we'd be foolish to pretend that there aren't. I'll just quickly run through the ones that I've observed. There are academic studies of this that go much further, but first is the nature of results. Generally speaking, results in the business world are pretty specific and measurable, so that there's also a difference in the measurement of results. Most of what we do as historians, or if you will, humanists, the output is difficult to measure quantitatively, and it is, in most cases, really measured qualitatively. We, as historians, love nuance. We refine old ideas, challenge them, rework them, and come up with something which is always more complicated and sophisticated than the original premise, and consequently has to be assessed in terms of a lot of subjective criteria. Business is largely project-oriented. People set goals, give timelines and goals to them, and measure how quickly they get met. Academia is filled with tasks, but exactly when they're going to get done and what the quality of that doing is kind of up for grabs in a lot of cases. I can quote one of my favorite anthropologists, Catherine Bergery: academics have an infinite capacity for self-exploitation. We get together and we decide we're going to have a special issue of a journal. Select 2 people to be co-editors, which is mistake number 1. Then try to think of the dozen people in the world who've addressed this particular narrow topic in one way or another in the last decade or 2, and invite them to contribute to the volume. 5 years later, we have some contributions, but not the ones we really wanted. So one of the 2 co-organizers becomes sort of the person with the whip trying to get those in the door. And of course, we do the same thing in a lot of different other aspects of our life. Always task multiplication is going on for uncertain reasons. And sometimes, obviously, for the purposes of actually improving thought on some particular topic, but often for reasons that aren't really very well specified. Academia loves the notion of education. Mostly business functions on training. And many businesses do a fantastic job of training for particularly identifiable skills or outcomes. The education part of it is much more vague. If you've ever actually sat down and read some of the mission statements at various universities and colleges, which are endless, basically, you see the difference between those things. Academia really doesn't pay much attention to interpersonal skills. They are assumed. Now, for example, leadership. Leadership is assumed to increase in quality with the number of publications that the given person has put out. So, ideally, we pick for the head of a program or a dean, someone who is a top-flight scholar. And on the other hand, there's a tremendous amount of emphasis certainly in the financial services business and related areas, on interpersonal skills, on problem solving in a group, on the skills and abilities of mentorship, and so on. In fact, when it comes to interpersonal skills, the academic community really is the North Korea of interpersonal abilities. Guess that for the first applause line. Pace of change is different, okay? When I got to the University of Michigan as a graduate student in 1972, the first piece of correspondence I got from the dean of the graduate school said, we want to bring your attention to the fact that the average length of time from beginning the program to receiving a PhD is 3 years longer than is allowed. Business, on the other hand, loves slogans like, do something even if it's wrong. I would say, however, that if anybody ever says this to you, don't do it. They'll remember part of that, but they won't remember the other part. And of course, compensation. And this is one of the areas, I think, in which we've seen some evolution in the academic world, and it probably leads me to point out generally that there's been something of a convergence between academia and business, mainly because business practices and models are starting to permeate the academy, to the dismay of many of us. And my own feeling is that in many cases they're not nearly as insidious as we first perceive them to be, and in fact are almost inevitable. But nevertheless, there is this, let's say, gradual infiltration of the academy, which is in essence a medieval institution working on the apprentice system by modern capitalism and business models. So, a lot of differences, but there are some common elements too. And it's these that I'd like to focus on, because these common elements are what make it possible for some of you or for me to make a transition from one field to the other. First of all, both in principle are meritocracies. Now we know that no organization is perfectly a meritocracy, but in principle they are, and in general, I'd say, good performance gets rewarded in both types of organizations. Both are competitive. I think we, as academics, humanists in particular, are kind of reluctant to admit just how competitive the world in which we live is. I've been to some departmental meetings where I had no doubt that competition was one of the driving forces. And of course in business it's overt. There's competition everywhere. And in fact, when making the move to business, one of the things that I found out is it greatly broadened the number of areas in which I could compete. And if you like to compete, it is really in a sense, a superior place to do that. Both fields or both institutions thrive on creativity. We call it creativity, they call it innovation. They call it entrepreneurship. And I heard these words this morning in the panel on education and administration, more than I ever expected to. But that is actually what's going on, I think, in a lot of different professions today. The recognition of how important innovation and creativity are. The most important assets for us and for the business world ride the elevator up and down every day. They're human beings, and human beings who are taking charge of their own destiny, either individually or collectively as an organization. You may find this hard to swallow, but I am convinced that it's true. A strong moral compass is important to long-term success. I frankly would tell you I didn't believe that when I first went to work for Merrill Lynch, and after 10 years of seeing some of the mighty fall, I really came to believe it. Now, not that virtue wins out every time and that evil never triumphs. It does, I think you'd agree with me, in the academic world or business. But long-term, for most people, this is something that is common to both organizations. Both rely on persuasive human communications. That's kind of a function, byproduct of the fact that they are people organizations. We, as humanists, define that persuasion as writing. Sometimes it's verbal, but usually it's in writing. The counterpart of that in the business world is marketing. Now, we may produce a 600-page tome, and the marketing people produce a 30-second spot, but it's still a form of removed communication. And what I think is a really important thing that took me a long time to realize is teaching in the corporate world is spelled S-A-L-E-S. You've got to sit back and think a lot about what teaching really is to see how close these two activities really are. But it's amazing it was amazing to me when I was struggling myself in trying to figure out how to sell and why I should sell, that I eventually decided, this is so much like teaching. I could do this. And I think a lot of people have gone through that experience as well. And really seen sales, which I think comes out as a much more, let's say, ethically palatable activity in terms of comparing it to teaching. Just a couple thoughts on the nature of any transition. This week, I heard a lot about this morning. There are basically two trajectories that all of us kind of fall into. And one is the lifetime career, and the other is several careers, a multiplicity driven by opportunism and by a desire, a certain restlessness, and a desire to do different things. So you're going to be much better prepared to think about and actually execute a change in careers if you have that restlessness in you. It comes down to a sense of adventure, risk-taking, and willing to go out to do something that very few or even no one has done before and make it happen. Just in financial terms, career change makes you more of a venture capitalist than an investor. An investor invests money with the expectation of a fairly specifiable return. Bond at 6% or equities might be 8 or 9% over several years. The equity venture capitalist tries to pick 20 companies that are going to succeed over time, knowing that 16 of them are going to fail miserably, and see some of these others achieve phenomenal success. Finally, let me say this because I think that it's actually very important when you're starting to think about a transition. Integrity and candor are critical. This is not a business where you can make things up as you go along. I have sat in many, many interviews and knew from the very beginning that I was having smoke blown at me. There's a lot of ways to determine that and determine them fairly quickly. The person who comes in with that approach doesn't last very long, even in the interview process. But it's very important, I think, not to say anything or do anything that you, not to say anything that you don't believe or do anything that you don't believe in. Okay, I'm going to just break this down now into 3 processes. First of all, assessment. Second, communication. And third, integration. And tell you what I mean by each of these. We'll just look at each of these processes, probably look at most at the assessment. Self-assessment. Now, I know that everybody is engaged in self-assessment all the time. And we as historians do it a lot. And I think do it pretty effectively. But I'm going to argue today that you should think about a kind of a different way of doing that self-assessment, which kind of follows the way in which I interview people. And that is to associate specific life experiences with key character traits and personal qualities. Now, it's very easy to associate personal experiences with skills. Associated with personal qualities is a much more difficult thing to do, and frankly more painful. We've all had these crucible experiences in our lives that have changed things for us forever. And sometimes it's really difficult to face these and particularly to talk about them freely in public. But they are, in a sense, the key to understanding who you are, for you to understand who you are and make yourself understandable to another person. The goal of this, then, is to identify 3 to 7 qualities, maybe more or less, that a prospective colleague or employer should know that you possess. You can't hide this under a bushel. You have to make it known. The method here is simply to read your life history and unbundle the meaningful key life experiences, translate them into the particulars. Ask, there's K missing, ask those who know you best, or ask what others who know you well would say about you. It's a kind of a trick interview question, actually. Particularly if you've just been fired from your previous job. What would Joe Schmo there say if I picked up the phone? Now, I can translate that question for you. What the interviewer is really saying is, I'm too lazy to pick up that phone, so I'm going to ask you to compromise yourself. So it's something that's very easy to lie about, but I think it's important to actually be candid in response to that question. Now, what do I mean by personal qualities and character? Just give you some examples, and I will admit that in some cases, what we're saying, what I'm calling personal qualities, edge into the area of skills, and are actually, in some sense, teachable or developable. You're a learner, a leader, an effective team member, a mentor or a mentee. You are an innovator, high achiever, conciliator, relentless pursuer of goals, motivator, devoted to daily development and learning. You're just going to do what it takes. I was hired in 1981, and it wasn't until 1983 that I actually asked the guy who hired me, who was a friend of mine from high school days, why he recruited me, why he came after me so hard when I was sitting there at the University of Oregon as a starving assistant professor. And he said, because I know you're going to do what it takes. That was it. That quality alone, if you could convey it effectively to people who are sitting in the behind the desk that have the power to hire you, is probably the most powerful thing that you can communicate. Qualified, of course, that you're going to do so within ethical and legal boundaries. Okay, pitfalls, avoid generalities, cliches. I was ready to shoot the next person who came into my office and said, I like working with people. And I mean, the answer to that is, well, what are you, a gorilla? I mean, I'm not expecting you to do anything else. But there are actually ways where you could break down this concept of working with people and go into some detail of what you mean by that. And it comes out just fine. Again, if you're rooting it in life experiences and can say something like, when I first taught a class, I discovered that I work best in a teaching environment if I conceptualize the group as a team. And we all have a responsibility. Something like that, where you're giving specificity to what would otherwise be a very general cliche. Let me take a look at just one example. A former student of someone, maybe, Tom, call him Tom, a college senior. This is just taken from his resume, okay? Interestingly enough, he had an internship at Merrill Lynch for a couple of summers and described it as follows: exposed to upper-level management and company strategy. Now that's pretty good, I think, in terms of capturing what he got out of this and what it might even say about him. Second point, research stock and mutual fund reports, I think that's a dud. Doesn't really say anything about him. And by the way, the typical way that people compile a resume is to list their activities and allow the reader to discern that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread and you should therefore be hired. Okay, let's go on. He also worked at the Polo Fields Golf and Country Club as a sales representative horse ranger in 1998. Now, this next one is really something, I think, for somebody who's just a college senior. Developed interpersonal skills and exemplified flexibility. Now, I have no idea what that means, but it certainly is an occasion to ask further about what this young man did. Gained invaluable experience working under club professionals, okay? At this custom builder, home builder, he developed a knowledge of independent business and strategic planning from the high executive office to which he was promoted the day that he walked in. So you could look at this and say, okay, I think he did some good things in terms of identifying, translating these basically internship and summer experiences into something that's credible. Unfortunately, Tom never got a chance to get the job of his dreams in the white-collar world. He became a manual laborer, and possibly because when it got to the next part of his resume, he didn't really list anything about what he got out of these incredible experiences. The only word, there's one word here, and that is he guided the football team. Now, think about how he might have put that in terms of gaining the confidence of people and assuming a leadership position. Now, you've probably figured this out by now, but we dare not pity him too much. This is, we'll call him Tom Brady, who is, he actually took a cut to, I think, $1 million this year, which obviously is, in the academic community, a mere pittance of what a football player can make. But he actually compiled this resume while he was a senior and waiting to see where he would go in the draft. And he said, I thought I was going to need this at about the beginning of the 5th round. And remember that Tom Brady was drafted number 199 and barely within the realm of really making the NFL. So I think you have to look at his efforts at the time that he was doing this as sincere and as genuinely trying to convey who he was. I think there's some plaudits to give him there. You can give him plaudits for a lot of other things too. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what do you as an historian, what do we as practicing historians have to talk about based on our experiences. Let me just get, if you'll be so good as to volunteer here a little bit. Research. Who's, let's say within the last year, finished fairly substantial amount of archival research? Okay, thank you, sir, for volunteering. Okay, how did you feel when you finished that research?
How did I feel?
Yes.
Relieved.
Relieved, okay. Did you feel that you had accomplished anything?
Yes.
Never been thrown out of an archive?
No.
Oh, you haven't lived. We're going to have to take him over to Bosnia to see what it really means to be tossed out of an archive. Let me suggest something about research. You walk into an archive. First of all, in many parts of the world, getting into an archive is a major accomplishment of human relations. A colleague of ours, Emily Gribble, spent a year in Sarajevo, talked her way into every archive in the city. I had, I was 20 years before her, but she went into places that I never got into. And she was just fantastic at charming leaves off trees, but also indicating the very seriousness of her project and how essential the archival work was. And so she would be in a position to say, I basically convinced, I have the persuasive skills to get into archives that other people have not. Okay, let's think about writing. A solitary activity, right? Not one that is normally done collectively. What do you think completing a dissertation says about you? Persistence? How are you going to couch that when you describe it now? I'm going to say ethics.
We'll do what is necessary.
And I mean, you can remember now. The person you're talking to, whether it's an interviewer or just someone in your target, the place where you want to work, doesn't know what it takes to write a dissertation. They think it's a lot of pages and a lot of words. So you selecting materials, assigning priorities to one thing over another, couching these things in a way that is compelling and convincing. This is an instinct that you have in part, and it's also a skill that you develop. Everybody's kind of impressed, I think, if you walk in and you've written a book. If they aren't at the beginning, then sort of they are at the end, I think. When I left Merrill Lynch, which is actually quit working 2 years before I left, at least some people said so, but there was this farewell party, and a manager that worked for me for several years, who was from Hell's Kitchen, he grew up in Puerto Rico, and he was giving one of the speeches, and he said, we know, Bob, that you've got this book that was published by these guys over here, and we understand that it's been translated into Bosnian, it's translated into Japanese. He said, that's phenomenal. I said, Bob, on behalf of the Spanish-speaking people of this country, we don't care. And that pretty well summarizes it. Teaching, I think, is the most lucrative area that you can interrogate for what it says about you. And I don't want to take the time to do that, but I think you can see that when you start thinking through what you do to teach a course, and the feedback that you experience from students, the excitement that you generate, the leadership qualities it takes to do that, the credibility that you must have in order to be an effective teacher. and your compassion for the students. There's nobody who's going to teach a course that's going to be really popular and well received unless they have compassion for the students who are involved. You can even think about committee membership and service activities. Again, if you think about these sort of crucible experiences where something happened that really sort of changed you, that's the reference point that you want to think about starting out with. Okay. Now, the point I would make is that this can be done by pretty much anybody using any activity, but it really is a particularly important talent, if you will, or skill to develop when you're walking in the door of a business or potential employer. And I'm going to take an example of this from a young woman named, let's see, let's go ahead. I'm going to just, excuse me, I lost you. Let me back up just a little bit and talk about the assessment. The key, this I think is kind of surprising when you think about it, but the key to self-assessment and to assessing any place you want to work for and anybody you want to work for is actually being a learner. You have to ask so many questions and find out so much that in the process you might as well let everybody know that you are a learner, that you welcome learning from people who know more than you about a particular task or function. The key there is to actually tell people that you had some experience in the past. Say you had you were a mentee, and so now you're coming in and you're wondering if the company that you're about to apply to has a mentor program. That's a great question to ask an employer because it says, I want to learn. I want someone to help show me the ropes. And even later on, wanting to learn about the new job, I think is a critical factor. Okay. So what we're asking you to do here in both the assessment and communication phase is to embed your strengths, character traits, and skills into a narrative of your life history. Someone this morning on that panel said the varies. Oh, it was Eugene, I think, who said the very same thing. This is, you're going to come up with a narrative. It's not an exhaustive narrative. It's not your autobiography. It's key events which are particularly revealing of who you are, what you're made of. And you can always use a phrase, something like, before I taught this course, I really didn't know much about teaching, but in the course of teaching this class, I discovered that teamwork is the most important thing that can go on in a learning environment. Now that does two things. It sort of tries to blow the stereotype of the classroom as a dull place where you're giving lectures. And then it also keys the fact that you like teamwork. You're good at teamwork. You're good at working on a team. And the whole team thing has taken the business world by storm in the last 2-3 decades now. I can't tell you the number of people, consultants who are wandering around trying to work with teams and teach better teamwork in the business world. The art here is to present yourself well without bragging, by conveying rather than asserting. If you come into, it could be an interviewer's office or anybody that you've just met and say, I'm an honest person, I work my ass off, I'm determined to do whatever it takes. The answer to that is, I don't believe you, because I don't see any evidence of it. Tell me what you did, specifically, that will allow me to conclude that you're not lying to me, that you're not blowing smoke. because everybody knows these lines, but very few people actually tie it to life experiences in this way, and allow then the you sort of help the interviewer or the person you're meeting to take that next step and say, this guy had a horrendous experience with X and Y, and by God, he learned from it. And I think it really did strengthen his character when I think about it that way. I'm going to just quickly run through these interview questions. There are a lot of the ones that I used to use. You're probably very familiar with some of these. They are, however, different from the academic, job talk kind of interview, which is, a little bit different. What are your goals? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? Think it through in advance and know what you're going to say, because the faster that comes out, the more determined you look. And if indeed you have truly contemplated that issue and you're being honest with yourself and your interviewer, it really helps. Tell me about yourself. Okay, there's a subtext there that says, why have you darkened my door and taken up my time? And it's what I call the origin myth. What is it that actually brought you in the door? When did you decide that you wanted to do this? How did you decide that you wanted to do this? And, what can we expect in terms of follow-through? This is basically the purpose of the question. You usually get a question something like this, if not from an interview, from someone that you meet maybe casually, and who is the person who kind of ushers you into the company and helps you get an interview. What are your strengths and weaknesses? You gotta have a weakness, I'm sorry, but you gotta have a weakness other than, well, I'm a perfectionist. What are your most significant achievements? Not necessarily the most, let's say, expansive, dramatic experiences, but your most important achievements that you really feel you had. Maybe it's raising a family, maybe it's getting married, having a child. Whatever it is, you want to be ready to say what it is when you're talking to people, because your time to do this is always limited, of course. What have you failed at? Everybody who asks this question doesn't care what you failed at. They only care about what you did about it. You got up, dusted yourself off, or it royally angered you, and you went ahead and charged and got it done anyway, or you sat around and stewed about it for 2 weeks and then got on the horse and did something else, or whatever it is. But how you deal, how you cope with failure is a vitally important, let's say, indicator of character. And I think a lot of people will appreciate a candid answer to this. What would others say about you? Already kind of covered that. Again, you don't want to make it up, but you might be a little selective. I'll give you just an example of a communicator here. This is Tracy Britt Cool. Now, for all the things that she has done, I maintain that the most impressive was actually bribing her parents from the womb to give her that name. That is just unbelievable. But here's her story. I grew up on a fruit and vegetable farm in Manhattan, Kansas. Every minute I had to work on the farm, I hated it. Now, that's kind of an admission against interest. But it actually shaped my dedication, my work ethic, and the way I follow through inside me. So that effectively this unexpected statement of I hated it sort of disarms the person who's asking it, and then she kind of slides in, oh, I got these qualities because this is what I did. I just worked whether I liked it or not. Okay, that says I work hard and I'm reliable. Okay, let's take the next, this is in an interview with MSNBC that she did this. I had my own farmer's market stand at age 10, hired my friends, set the wages, set prices. I realized I liked all aspects of the business, and that's what I wanted to go into. What does that say about what she's saying? What is she saying? What is she communicating here about herself? Well, she's certainly giving you an origin. She's telling you that from age 10, when she got her hands dirty doing this stuff, this is what she wanted to do. Now, it isn't very often that you get somebody who says, I want to do this from age 10. And it's, in this case, I think quite convincing, because she's already told you that this is what developed her work habits. And what else is she saying? She's saying, you know, I kind of formed this little business. I did all the essential tasks of organizing a business. And I have leadership ability because I got these friends of mine, these suckers, for this whole idea of selling corn in the middle of Kansas. So it really, she's saying I have leadership experience and I have a long-standing interest in the field. Now, so far she hasn't talked about anything beyond age 10. And she's already kind of fulfilled the basic requirement here of displaying a lot about her character and telling you and documenting it, at least verbally, of how she got that way. Okay, her next statement is, and this is again in the interview in MSNBC, are not appropriate for an interview or for a job interview, but maybe it is. I'm very excited about the future. There will be lots of changes, new businesses, and businesses that disrupt. There's a business word. There's no innovation anymore, they're just disruptors. Okay, so disrupt existing businesses, opportunities to work across borders. It makes sense, given the global population, that we're more connected now than we've ever been. Okay. So she's striking these themes that are just really big in the corporate world. And it kind of moves her beyond begging for a position to, here's how I can see things. And I want to be a part of this thing going forward. So she's enthusiastic and forward-looking. And then she says, if I look over the next 25 years, I see technology as a critical component of business. Duh, it's not news to anybody that that's the case. But then she goes on to say, not just traditional IT and fulfillment centers, no, not this Amazon stuff, no, a whole new world of customer experience and personalization and tools that companies can offer to improve the customer experience. So, I mean, she's not saying, well, I need to pick up my computer skills so I can use Word more effectively, or, you know, understand spreadsheets. This is my vision. I have a vision for the future. Probably could have been done better, but as a statement of where I want to go, I think it's pretty good. So she says this, and then actually in two different statements she says, you need to learn every single day. If you don't go to bed smarter than you wake up, that's been a productive day. She is a learner. She is signaling that she is a learner and that she will adapt via learning to any new situations and challenges. And that's kind of my key point in all of this. Another thing is growth, personal growth that's going to benefit not only me, but my employer. It's a daily activity. I intend to expand and grow. I'm ambitious, for that matter, so don't expect me to sit around and become Bartleby the Scrivener here. I'm going to push for going higher and better. This is a little bit about Tracy Gould-Britt. She met Warren Buffett in 2006. Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha and owner of Berkshire Hathaway. So when I graduated from business school, he wrote a letter, not for a job. Okay. I just told him I would do anything in the office if I could pick his brain on various investment topics and business topics. That's, I think, a really important point. wait as long as you possibly can to ask for a job. Be a learner, be a questioner, find out as much as you can about yourself and the place where you're going. That's all you're doing. It's all you have to be doing right now. And sooner or later, someone's going to come along and say, hey, why don't you put your application in? Or, let me take you over to Joe here, who does this interviewing. I think you might appreciate getting to know you. She's 5 years with Berkshire Hathaway. She's 30 years old, just recently married. She served on several corporate boards of Berkshire Hathaway companies, and just a couple months ago was named the CEO of Pampered Chef, which is a $700 million company that stopped growing, essentially. If you know anything about the turnaround business, most turnaround artists in business are retired executives. I mean, they're people in their at least 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so this woman, at age 30, is 2 offices away from Warren Buffett. There was a lot of speculation in the press that she would be named to succeed him. He's, I think, 84, which has kind of been denied. But I would still call her a very successful business person with just really the simplest of strategies to come in, get heard out, and then actually begin to perform in an important way. Okay, I'm going to finish just with this idea of adapting to the new job. And I want to address this specifically to historians and humanists in general. When you go to your new job, you are going to be, in most meetings, on most days, the smartest person in the room. If you are not the smartest person in the room, there are several people in the room who believe and suspect that you think you're the smartest person. This is a very dangerous situation when you start a new job. Now, what would you think that I would prescribe as a solution to this situation? Be a learner. You've got a boss there. And I've worked for several of these people, as Jamie knows. They are scared to death of somebody they think's brighter than they are. They want to dismiss your achievements, but they really kind of recognize that you've done this stuff that very few people have done. They're threatened by you. So, and that person may be the most despicable human being on the face of the earth, treating people poorly, and so on. But what you need to do is find something about that person that is a quality that you can respect and admire, and ask them for help for yourself. If anybody offers you mentorship, take it. Sometimes it's almost humiliating to do that, but it is an important part of getting along in a large, complex organization, and I think you see the same thing really in the academy. Learn from pretty much anybody who can help you perform your task better, get along better, and particularly if that person is your boss or in this group of people who have some say in who you are, what you're going to do. So it's sort of a adaptation to try to integrate yourself in. Less pleasant or more difficult tasks. I tell you, for me, this was selling. I just couldn't figure out why I should sell anything. I hated the very concept. I was terrible at it. And it was a long time before I actually felt comfortable with selling and learned to sell effectively. I've already told you that really came the moment that I realized this is kind of a variant of teaching. And a couple years after this happened, my boss came up to me and said, I think you sell differently than a lot of people around here. You basically let people come in and you educate them. And let them make up their own minds with with the education that you're imparting to it. Now, I don't agree that that's was unique to me, because I saw a lot of people, some of the most successful people at Merrill Lynch, selling exactly that way. They don't want a client to feel uncomfortable about anything that they do. Why? Because that client is a client for life. They want trust, they want confidence, they want that client to say no to anybody else who's going to come along and try and make it all. All right, so strategy 1, be a learner. Strategy 2, be a learner. And if you really get desperate, just try managing your boss, which is a whole new art about this situation. Okay, we're going to quickly move now to where you can stand up and disagree with me. I don't think you have to boo or shout anymore because you're all tweeting. You are, if you have a master's in history, you are a professional. You have practiced your craft of history, almost certainly by teaching and very definitely by writing and doing research. That makes you not only a historian, but a professional. And I think it's important to remember that as a professional, what you're trying to do is find a match between your abilities and interests and something in this huge world of corporations that can benefit from your qualities and your skills. You're not a supplement. And you're very much in need of presenting yourself through a variety of ways, but you're not the one who's begging for a job. I had just about the time that I actually started hiring people, I got a call from a woman who had just been denied tenure at the University of Michigan. And I just knew her as graduate student to assistant professor, but I knew her reasonably well. I thought well of her. She had a reputation as a very good teacher. And so she said, I wonder, things aren't working out here. I'm not going to get tenure. And she said, I wonder if there's maybe anything in the financial services business. And I said, well, let me ask you a question first. How do you feel about sales? And she said, profoundly ambivalent. Now, that ended the conversation. Anything else? This would have been a fine answer if I'd said, what do you think about cross-dressing in 17th century Negroes? But for the occasion where she was actually starting the process, it was clear that she hadn't self-reflected, she hadn't thought about what she wanted to achieve, what she actually wanted in essence to do, and just gave that very academic answer, which I don't hold it against her, but it was plain right there that she was not suited for making this kind of transition. So don't come as a supplicant. Come as a person who has an agenda, has a determination to do something. Maybe you're going to do it with this employer, maybe you're not, but you're going to be a person that is going to accomplish things, and if this corporation doesn't hire you, 10 years later, wish the same. Ask questions, just be a learner at all stages of the process. You would be amazed at the power of consecutive questions in terms of positioning yourself with someone. And when you meet somebody, let's say your next door neighbor has a friend who works in a company nearby. So you go to your next door neighbor and say, hey, would you mind introducing me to Joe? And you say, I'm considering a career change. I'm not looking for a job right now, but I'd like to know something about XYZ Widgets Corporation. So you're thinking big, ambitiously, and positively, and you are forward-looking and optimistic. If you can't be optimistic about the future of your own life and at least part of the world around you, it is not going to work. I tell you, that is just such an important attitude, mindset to have when you're doing this. And finally, you learn. Okay, any, would you like to referee the questions?
Yeah,
okay.
yes, I'm good at that. There you
Okay.
go. I'll put on my whistle. All right. We have about, I think it looks like about 15, 20 minutes for some questions. So anybody wants to start? Yes, Brian.
Hi.
Hi, Brian.
Brian Carroll, a PhD student here at UNM. I guess I'm just struck by what I feel like are definitely some clear overlaps between the academic and the business world, but also something you said about being really kind of honest with ourselves. And if we're not going to give those types of answers, does that just mean that maybe that type of position is not for us?
It could. It could be. But again, being honest, you can say something like, I will tell you, I love this work. I could do it my entire life. But right now, I'm kind of looking for something more. I'm looking for a different kind of satisfaction. I'm looking for new things to do, new challenges to meet. And yes, if I could tomorrow, I'd go back right back. That's what I did. I mean, it took me 19 years, but I eventually went back and started doing all the stuff that we do all the time again. And so, this question of after history, maybe it's history. And one of the things that will come up frequently is, okay, you're saying you want to come work for this company and you want to make some money, which is something that you can never hesitate to say if that's the case. And your motivation for making that money is that you want to retire early and work as a historian again for the rest of your life. Now, if you don't believe that, then don't say it. But it is a way, that's the way I went in. The day I went to work for Merrill Lynch, I knew exactly what I needed to become financially independent. And I can tell you exactly the day that I looked at the screen and determined that I had it. But now, Jane's going to have to go back to work because but it's a legitimate financial, it's a legitimate goal. And there's no reason not to share it in the interview.
Derwin.
I was curious by your comment that it seemed like interviewers in the corporate world wouldn't take a dissertation very seriously, that whole process of research and writing. Is there a way that you can break down the dissertation experience into language that matters?
Absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
just sort of thinking like, the dissertation, you conceive of the project, you plan it, you design it, you execute it by researching, writing, synthesizing. Are those words that would matter to corporate interviewers?
Absolutely. And again, try to relate this whole process to particular personal qualities of yours. I mean, don't forget that you just learned that somebody at Okefenokee Tech has just started the same dissertation. You have to go find her and throw her in the river. So, I mean, you really want to think through these steps and say, okay, now what does that really say about me? I can discern things. I had to go through a lot of hoops because, my mentors didn't agree on exactly what I ought to be doing, or I started 3 times and just couldn't get there. It was a very difficult accomplishment for me just to get chapter 1 done. don't tell the story.
I am now the keeper of the story.
Yes.
Yeah, I will.
But that kind of thing. And yes, absolutely, you're just thinking exactly the way that I would hope a candidate would, who's coming in just across the transom, having academic achievements to their credit. Think about the character implications of it.
How about a person that starts from the corporate world and then they see the light and then they go to academia, but they have more experience on other skills rather than academia? How do you present yourself?
I'm sorry there's no hope for you, sir. No, I think the more experience you have, if you're looking at it from the point of view of the academy, the more experiences like this you have, the better off you are.
But do really universities see that as a plus, as an asset that you have other experience rather than academia?
I think so. Let me say this is the challenge. It's part of the reason that we're here, is to try to, let's say, strengthen the mutual understanding between the academy and other fields, and come to appreciate what they entail. And so I think that it works both ways. We in the academy have to do a better job of understanding what it's like to rise in the ranks of the corporation, deal with all the moral dilemmas along the way, deal with the many failures that you may have experienced. All of that stuff, it seems to me, we really don't appreciate enough. But we're starting to, I hope, more. And it's all valuable, even if nobody, if all the Spanish people in the United States don't care, sooner or later, that experience is going to come in very valuable.
Let's see, I think it's all Scott and then Andrew.
Well, I'll just pose the question. You're in a unique situation because of your background as a historian. You're talking basically to the prior here. In terms of other corporations, other organizational structures, do you think an academic has a higher bar to cross over getting into that world, those organizations?
It's very individualized. It would be individualized by company, by the particular type of work you're seeking to do, by the interviewer, him or herself. It's difficult to generalize about that. I don't know that the challenge is all that different in any case. You have to do what we're going to do tomorrow, the elevator pitches, and learn and ask and do all these things that I've suggested. And then maybe you get to the point, or your prospective employer gets to the point that says, sorry, it's not going to work out. Now, by the way, what do you do when you're thrown out of the interview?
Thrown out?
Huh?
Thrown out?
Thrown out. This is a waste of my time. Get out of here. Turn around and say, would you please do me a favor of telling me what you think is deficient in me? What can I do to be a better candidate at the next firm I talk to, or maybe even the next time I talk to you? Do I need a degree? Do I need courses? Do I need a better smile? Whatever it is, if you can help me a great deal by doing that. Most interviewers will tell you at least something. You rarely tell the whole truth because of the lawyer lurking out the front door, but which is one of the unfortunate developments of the last couple of decades is you really have to be careful as an employer what you disclose or share. That telephone call, that hypothetical telephone call, I'm going to call this guy to see what he would say about me. Legally, he can't say anything about you. except you were employed. It's the only thing we could say. Anything else will invite legal trouble.
Right.
So, I think the basic ones usually can be done.
Thanks for this really interesting talk. I'm reminded that one of the classic set pieces of business education, right, is that case study. And the case study is really fundamentally a historical genre. Right? They say, okay, we look back into previous firms of this kind, and we look carefully at what they did, and we draw some moral from it. They diversified too early, they failed to diversify, they lost track of their goals. Because that is such a narrative and historical piece, I'm wondering if the ability of historians to think more carefully about narrative and cause and effect, whether the case study might be a way for us to get into the business world by saying, actually, we're really good at figuring out what's wrong or right with the way you've been imagining the series of stories that lead you to a conclusion about here's what we have to do next.
Yes, I think that is potentially possible. You have to go to your colleague at the business school and say, I know you're doing these case studies every day. I'm doing these studies which are remarkably similar to a case study. Let's try and get together on one and see if we can produce a better product, reach more, nuanced conclusions or whatever it is, and actually give it a whirl. And if you can get somebody from the business world to actually try that with you, that's a wonderful way to get an entree into that world.
And last question.
So I have a sort of pragmatic question regarding strengths, weaknesses, and cliches. And I understand that having a good life example is important. But what if your strength, weakness answer really is a cliche? And you have a nice, you've got a nice kind of personal example of it. For instance, I think strengths and weaknesses, you use Willie Loman and this other character. Strengths and weaknesses are the same thing in kind of different aspects of your different contexts, which is cliche. And if I could give a couple of examples where my strengths are a strength and where my strength is a weakness or vice versa, I guess I sort of wonder when it really is cliche, because those questions are cliche. How do you avoid falling into the cliche? Because it's all kind of, even the tell us about yourself is sort of cliche. You want to know something specific. So I wonder, I guess I'm just curious, when you're in a sort of situation that is a bit, how do you honestly kind of confront that situation?
I think you better call Saul. I think you're overthinking this. You're going to be communicating. The nice thing about business is awful lot of this communication takes place in person, spontaneously. It's rather quick, to the point, and so, there are cliches that are going to be flying around all the time. You want to try to minimize them, but there are situations actually where a good quote from Seinfeld or even a biblical quote, something like that is a way to kind of move the conversation in a particular direction. I wouldn't worry about it.
I was once asked what part of the car I knew. And since the only part of the car I knew well enough to answer was the distributor cap, I had to use it.
That is genius.
But, questions are sometimes funny, and I think a lot of students that are trying to work in this field with situations where the questions are a little to be expected, and we think the answers are to be expected.
Well, one of the things that many interviewers will do is basically just throw something at you that's going to make you sit back and think. And they're interested in how you think, the thought process. They're not interested in your answer. So, you can prepare all you want to, and I believe you should, much more than most candidates that I've seen actually prepare. But eventually, there may come a question about, 17th century to 12th. Who knows? and you just do the best you can.
Well, I think we have reached the end of a really fabulous day, so thank you